What up, witches, and welcome to Witchin and Bitchin, the podcast. I'm your host, Darren.
And I'm Vicky. How are you all today? I hope you're doing really, really well.
Vicky's not. That's why she's not as chipper today.
No.
So, Vicky, let our listeners / viewers know what's going on with you today.
Well, I don't even know, to be honest. Technology just does not want to work for me today. It didn't want to be in the original spot. So as you can see, I've just got this blank behind me and I'm just not moving at all because technology seems to be happy in this little bubble.
And here I was thinking that the Leo rising would be in her element during the Lionsgate season in Leo.
You know and everything. What? No, it has just been this big that's come through. I'm like, okay, I'll just stay here.
Okay, yes.
So yes, that's why I have this weird nothing background and I'm very far away and all the rest of it. Technology,
just don't move that.
I'm not going to move.
Yeah. So I was actually hoping you would go down a different route. So we were speculating off camera with our guest who I'm about to introduce.
Oh yes,
that could have been perhaps that there's some trickery going on, but we'll get to that soon.
Sure there is. I'm very much in need of guidance here. What do I need to be doing? It is creating this kerfuffle.
To stop all of this from happening. So in case you're wondering what I'm talking about, so we've got an amazing guest here. So Morgan Daimler is an author, teacher of esoteric subjects, witch and priest of the good folk, aka fairies. A prolific writer, Morgan has published more than 36 books. You heard that right, 36, both fiction and nonfiction, and presented workshops on fairies and Irish mythology at various events and conferences. So can you please welcome Morgan?
Yay! Hello, how are you going?
Well, I'm good. I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you so much for coming on. And
thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, see, now we definitely need you. We need all of your information just to see what on earth is going on here as well.
Yeah. So have you got any tips on because I know we said off camera, but we'll bring it on camera now that you were speculating that maybe there could be some fairies at play here.
Yeah, it just seems to be a thing whenever this subject is coming up in a technological format like this, that there's always really weird, inexplicable tech issues, which definitely has been the case so far today.
Yes. Definitely.
So yeah, maybe a good idea to offer a little milk or cream or butter, a little honey offerings for them.
Yeah. So there's no lactose intolerant fairies then?
No.
I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
Not that I know of.
Okay, cool.
Everybody seems to be happy with that, so that's good. Okay. I need to get up on my offerings.
Yes, I'm going to get on your case. I will get on your case.
Yes. Well, see, I used to be very good with all of that kind of thing, and I did sleep a little. So maybe this has been the boost to remember again.
This is the kick up the backside, more like it.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, you want to interview? No.
No, that's right. We need to have the offerings first. Okay, check. Offerings done. Right. All right. I'd love to just ask for your, I guess, your opinion and what your definition is of a modern day witch, because that's how we often start our interviews, just knowing that there is so many different ways. And with your background, I'd just love to know what your definition is.
Sure. I mean, to me, someone is a witch if they practice any sort of magic and if they consider themselves a witch.
Yep.
So I'm very easygoing.
I love it.
When it comes to that. Yeah. And I'm not a huge fan of gatekeeping in general. Mm-hmm. So any sort of definition that's really particular, I tend to not be a fan of. So if you think you're a witch and you do magic, there you go.
You're in, you got the ticks. And I mean, that's a big thing, isn't it? That's a really big part of it that we often forget is if you actually just consider yourself that as well, that you, who are you to be able to take that away from somebody else?
Yeah. I don't think we can ever really judge other people's journeys or experiences or, know what's going on with them behind the scenes. So if they say they are, okay.
Yep. That's it.
I love it. Nice and simple.
I love that. That's so good. And with that in mind, then, do you use the word witch for to describe yourself, or any other kind of terms or descriptors?
I do. Currently, pretty much I just stick to witch.
Yep.
Very straightforward.
Yeah, nice and easy.
Yeah. Previously, I have used other terms, but I found that other terms I would always have to get into like explanations, and it would end up being like a long essay of why do I call myself a druid, or why do I call myself a heathen, and now it's just I'm just a witch, and
just a witch.
Yeah, a little bit of Irish and a little bit of heathenry and mixed all together, and there you go. But just a witch.
At the end of the day, that's what you are. That's good. I love that.
Beautiful.
Keeping it simple.
Yeah, so like we kind of touched on a little bit on there. Like, could we unpack just so that for the people who, like, obviously I know you through your work with pagan portals, and I've seen that you've written like countless books on, in particular, Irish Celtic paganism and the gods, and then also the Faery Realm. But then, what's the origin story of Morgan? Like, how did we get to here? Like, as in, and I know that that's quite an open question, but like, what traditions have you been through? Like, I know you mentioned heathenry, you mentioned druidry. Like, what other types of traditions and paths have you followed to get to this point?
Sure. I feel like it's a much more spectacular origin story now. The way this got set up, like jazz hands, and no, I just well, I'll start really at the beginning, where my parents, my dad was Catholic, my mom was Protestant, which is kind of a no-no for some people.
Yeah.
So their families came up with what I consider to be the absolute most ridiculous sort of a ceasefire agreement in order for them to get married, which is they had to promise not to raise any children in any religion.
Oh, wow.
That was their big compromise.
Wow.
I don't know how this happened, to be honest, but so growing up, we weren't raised anything. We never went to church. We never it was like not discussed. And so for me, when I was younger, I had experiences with fairies. I would see things and all that kind of stuff. And when I would talk to my parents about it, they were always not encouraging, but not discouraging either.
Mm-hmm.
They would just sort of take what I said and be like, oh, okay. You want to write letters and leave them on the windowsill for fairies. Okay. Build little fairy houses. Sure. So, to me, because there was no other structure, the holidays we celebrated were just completely secular. I think I was probably 9 or 10 before I realized Christmas was supposed to be a celebration for Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
That was just when Santa came, and Easter was when the Easter Bunny came, and all this other stuff. Yeah. So
wait, are you telling me that that's not why we celebrate them? I'm just joking.
It's still why I celebrate them, because who doesn't like chocolate from a magic rabbit?
That's my favorite.
From a magic rabbit.
How can you go wrong with that?
Yeah, right.
And then when I was 11, my best friend at the time, who was Irish, she was born in Ireland and then moved to the US, and was extremely Catholic, very Catholic family, but she got a copy of Scott Cunningham's Wicca for the Solitary Practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
And of course shared it with me, because that's what friends do.
Yeah.
But to me, it was like this mind-blowing, like, this is an option. This can be a religion.
Yes.
And so as I'm reading it, just everything made so much sense to me. Kind of on my own, I had studied various religions, obviously at like 9, 10, 11. But none of them had really clicked. And then I hit that, and it was like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
We're going with this.
Yeah.
And then I started really studying the fairies and the folklore, and kind of particularly focusing on Irish deities. And this was, mind you, back in the 90s, which is the do-it-yourself era.
Yes, definitely.
So I was very much that kid who was like, well, I'm just gonna figure this out, and I'll make up my own thing, and it'll be great.
Best laid plans.
yeah But it definitely did kind of spark that spirituality in me.
Yep.
And that idea that witchcraft works, magical practice works, and that you can have religion attached to it or not, or whatever. But, you know, if you do have religion attached to it, that works really well together. And, you know, when I got a little older, when I was in my later teens, I started studying Druidry. I was actually part of a group here in the US called the Druid Order of the White Oak. And I did that. But it was always, from my point of view, I was always looking for what made sense. Like what works. I'm very pragmatic. What works and what makes sense. And in, I think it was 2006, I started getting interested in heathenry and looking into that and incorporating that. And my primary focus through all of this, which is sort of why I started with my origin story where I did, has always been the good folk, the fairies. And, you know, when I got into heathenry, you know, obviously the gods there are also awesome and cool, but they do have the Alfar, the Hulda folk, the kind of like the Norse, Germanic, Icelandic equivalent for what we have in Ireland for the same kind of concepts. I also should have said at the beginning that my dad's side of the family, the very Catholic side of the family, are Irish. At least my dad's paternal side. So I think that was also part of why when I was getting into fairies and talking about fairies, they were very like, okay, sure. You know?
Yeah, because it's very traditional to have that belief system in Ireland. Like most Irish people are raised with some knowledge of their fae.
Most people in Ireland aren't as interactive. And probably wouldn't have encouraged children to, you know, like go ahead, go do that. But there's definitely a belief and a respect in it, and the idea that like you don't mess with certain places, and you know, you sort of acknowledge that they're powerful and respect that. So I'm sure that also came into play with a lot of this. But yeah, like I'd said, in defining what witch is to me, like I hit a point where I was like, you know, I can talk about being heathen, or I can talk about, you know, being an Irish pagan, but witch just kind of sums it all up. You know,
it's like an all-encompassing term.
Without having to get into the like 5-minute explanation for what heathenry means today.
That's it.
So like actually I wanted to just a couple of follow-up questions on what you said, just for some people who might be listening. They may not necessarily know certain terms. So what would you define as being the difference between heathenry versus paganism? Because it, like, you know how they say that all witches are pagans, but not all pagans are witches. Like, is it the same thing with heathens, or is it different?
Yeah, and this is actually one of those things that it depends on where you are. And I say this mostly because the publisher I write for is a UK publisher. They're based in London. And what heathen means in London and in England in general, in that part of the world, is not the same as how we would use it in the US. So, you know, like in the UK, if you say you're heathen, it's kind of equivalent to being pagan. The terms are kind of interchangeable. So you hear people talking about being like an Irish heathen, or you know, they use those terms synonymously. In the US, it's very different. If you say you're heathen, it's very specifically Norse or Germanic or Anglo-Saxon focused, which means that you not necessarily have to be a Reconstructionist, but generally try to look at the historic religion and be as close to that usually as you can be. And acknowledge the gods of that pantheon, the Aesir, usually Vanir. I'm a little different. I always manage to be heretical wherever I am because I focus more on the Alfar. What you gonna do? Whereas pagan is a more general term that sort of for anyone who acknowledges or honors more than one god. But usually in the US, if you say pagan, it's sort of a separate group than heathen.
I think it's am I not right, Vicky, in saying that we follow the same principles as I guess the US then down here, that heathen and pagan are kind of different?
That it is usually when you hear the word heathen, it is usually then associated with the North.
It's more like
side of things.
Is it asatru? Is that how you pronounce it? Asatru.
Asatru.
So it's like that kind of realm. Heathenry is very specific, Nordic, Germanic, that kind of stuff. Whereas pagan is like more the umbrella that encompasses
kind of everything
all of those underneath.
Yeah. All the little branches kind of thing.
Yeah, that sounds very similar to how we have it over here.
Yeah. And then the other question I have for you then, obviously, because you've been raised in a situation where you were not raised on religion, so primarily, I guess, secular in your upbringing, even though your parents are religious, would you say, though, that your practice is religious? Like, do you honor any deities in your practice, or?
This is a fun story. So
we love those.
So I did. When I first started out, of course, again with Cunningham's wonderful Wicca for the Solitary Practitioner, everyone in the 90s, if you can remember the pink cover that it used to have, it's spectacular flashback there. And of course, I was, 11, 12 years old when I first started. So when you're that age and you have a book and the book says, you have to have a god and you have to have a goddess, kind of even embarrassed saying this on anything, but so that was in my head, like, oh, okay, so
I gotta do this.
Right. Like this is how you do religion, I guess. And I did carry that forward for quite a while, where I was like, when you have to have that, if you're going to be religious with this, you have to have like, a god and a goddess. And I kind of, as I got into my older teens, broke out of that and was like, okay, you don't necessarily have to have like not a prerequisite. You could have 5 goddesses if you want, or however you want to do it. I did for quite a while. I was acting as a priestess of Macha, who's one of the Morrigan. It's one of the more significant Irish goddesses. And then I went to Ireland in 2016, and I ended up, the trip was actually with a group, and the point was to go for sacred sites to honor the Morrigan. And I emphasize that to point out that like that was the intention I went there with. And my whole part of the trip went sideways really quickly. And I ended up with all of this otherworld stuff going on and all of this fairy stuff going on. And I had a very intense initiatory experience basically with that. And I don't sort of recommend it. It's not as much fun if you don't know it's going to happen until you're like halfway through it. But yeah, it was definitely, it was literally life-changing for me. And after that, that's pretty much been my primary focus. And I wouldn't necessarily refer to them as gods or, in that, because they're a slightly different concept, I guess you'd say. But I've pretty much been acting as a priest or priestess, whatever term you prefer to use, for them since then. So I do still acknowledge there are gods and they're important and significant, and I got nothing against deity. Before my computer explodes. The way everything's going today, like, just to be clear,
I'm good. I'm good with you.
no exploding laptops, no lightning strikes. Like, gods are awesome.
Everyone's good.
But it's my primary, I would still say it's religious. It's still a religious focus, but it's different than it was before. It's very convoluted, I realized.
I love that though. Like, you go first, Vicky. What were you going to say?
I think it's really beautiful just to show that as well, that because like you said, you kind of think like sometimes at the beginning you kind of think, I have to do this, I have to have this, and I have all of these things, but it's lovely to just be able to evolve, and we all do kind of change and evolve as things go on. And also, like saying in your story about that you had that initiatory experience, which a lot of people will go, oh, I wish I had that and all the rest of it, but it's not as all the sparkles and all the rest of it. Everybody kind of sometimes thinks it is, but that you can move with that path and you can find what works for you, and you can find where your connection is and those kinds of things with it. So
I think as humans, we get so in our own heads, and we're like, okay, this is the plan. And we're going to go from like, step A to step B to step C. And that was very much my mindset when I went to Ireland at that point. And I was like, okay, you know, I've been, you know, priestess of Macha for, I think it was like 10 years at that point, and we're doing this, and you know, this is my spirituality.
This is who I am. Yeah.
Right. And then I got there and they were like, ha ha ha, no.
No.
Yep. And you know, I think sometimes you just have to be willing to be flexible and realize, like, you know, it was hard seeing certain things come to an end that had been a significant part of my life for a while. But on the other hand, you know, then you open up this whole new exciting, interesting direction. So yeah.
No, that's beautiful, because I think it's like, I can almost see a lot of synergy with some parts of your story in that, and I've shared this with our listeners a number of times about my upbringing being, I was actually raised Catholic. Then at age 14, I said to my parents, I don't believe in God. And that was like a dagger in the heart to my Catholic father. Like blasphemy. And it wasn't until like I grew up and I dabbled in so many different religions and eventually got baptized Orthodox, which I still, funnily enough, I still consider myself to be Orthodox, but I just don't.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, no, but like I took so much time to kind of unpack that, because then when I dabbled through things, got baptized Orthodox, and I thought it was orthodoxy that I wanted, but it was actually the ceremonial, you know, all of that I was attracted to, the practices, which is why, because I took that step to get baptized, I still honor it, but in a traditional, because of my background sense. But now going through, like, obviously I went through the whole in and out of the witch closet multiple times. And it wasn't until I reconciled that whole concept of God, because that I had a big hang up about that word and how I pictured him, and why would this all loving, all creative, beautiful thing want to smite everybody and cause all this destruction? And until I reconciled that, I couldn't really put it to bed. But now I've kind of realized that I can still honor those practices, and God is nothing more than what we give it, right? So we can, when some people say God, I just say universe, source, spirit, whatever you want to call it. Funnily enough, no sooner did I get to reconciliation of that, now I have our God that decided to, hence the t-shirt and statue, which funnily enough is in the Celtic or Irish pantheon. Well, one of.
Gaulish, yeah.
Oh, Gaulish. Yeah. So exactly. So it's like I'm just finding so many different things, and it took me, 20 something years to get to this point of reconciliation. So it's so beautiful that how you've been able to take what could have been a very almost like, oh my God, I've been working down this path, and then now it's diverted, and that could easily turn some people off their journey, but you've just embraced it and rolled with the punches, which I love.
I mean, I try to. I definitely, at the time, I definitely had, like, if you can picture, like, if you tried to pick a cat up off of a couch when they dig their claws in, the couch cushion's coming with them.
Everything's coming.
Right. Like for a good half of that trip, I was like, no, this is about Morgan and this is what we're going to do. And then it was a good halfway in when things got so just blatantly ridiculous that I was like, okay, like I admit, like, this is not going the way I planned it to, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, we'll figure out where it's going from here. I just don't want you to have too high of opinion of me, because I initially was very much like this is not cool.
But I love that though, because it shows so much of how the journeys are so real and that they just constantly evolve, and that underneath all of it, whether it's the whole magical thing or everything, is that we're humans and we're trying to find our way through everything and work with whatever works for us. So no, I think it's wonderful.
I definitely think, like, if I could have like one heartfelt public service message for everyone listening. We do, I think, like, as witches in general, tend to get this idea of like you need to have this set approach, and you need to like stick to it and present this appearance of like, no, this is what I believe, and you know, this is my journey. And you know, life is just not like that, and spirituality is not like that either. Things change and beliefs change, and you know, I think we're constantly creating and recreating ourselves. And, you know, to be aware of that and to realize like, well, it's okay. It's okay if I, spent 10 years focusing on this particular goddess. And now I realize actually that's not, where I'm meant to be,
it's like my husband calls it my phases. He's like, oh, you're going through it. So he calls this my Canoenos phase. I'm like, it's not a phase. It's just part of the journey. Like it just reinvents itself and like it's the next step to the next thing. And it's kind of like, and it's only when you get to that step and then you reflect back and you start noticing all the little signs that you ignored. That universe was trying to get your attention. You're just like totally oblivious because you're so focused on that one track that you were on. And it's only when you can look back and go, oh, is that what that meant?
Yeah, so exactly though. I mean, when I had everything happen with me afterwards, and I was very like, oh, how am I going to explain to people, because I'm an author and I've written these books and now I'm going in this totally different direction. And the majority of my friends were like, do you really think you're going in a totally different direction? Yeah. We have news for you. Like all of us have seen this coming for a long time. Like you've always had this focus. It's just been like with other things, and now the other things aren't there. And I was like, huh.
Okay. It's like,
that's a good point.
Yep, I can see that.
But like you're saying, we get so caught up in like the little piece of the picture that we're looking at, and we don't see, we don't see the universe messages. We don't see where things are leading until we get there. And then it seems like a huge shock to us.
Yeah. It's like, hang on, we've been trying to tell you this the whole time. We've been warning you.
It's like here in the US, we have these telemarketers with this, they'll call about this car warranty that nobody actually has. Like, we've been trying to reach you about your car warranty. I feel like the universe is like that sometimes, where they're just every single day calling, like, we're trying to reach you with this message. If you could just pay attention for like just 5 seconds.
Bit. Yeah, that's it. Just a little bit.
Yeah. And we're always like, darn telemarketers.
I know. That's it.
Yeah, even though
sometimes
it's an important message. Yeah,
that's right.
So if there's one key take up from this podcast, it's anytime someone calls you, listen to what they have to say first before you tell them to go away.
Yes, before you hang up.
It could be some kind of message in there somewhere.
Yeah, and it could be the tiniest little thing you don't even realize until you hear the message and then say, oh, now that I've heard you, thank you, but no thank you.
That's right.
So
or now that I've heard you, actually, yes, this is important.
Yeah.
Let me write that down.
It's actually like a funny, because like Vicky and I were talking about this last night, because I talk about Canoenos saying that he's only come into my life in the last like month or so. But then I was going through photos with Vicky, and I was just sending her lots of random photos of my house before we built it, and the display home that we looked at that I fell in love with. And when I sent her all these photos, I'm like, I've only just realized how many deer, like things with deer on them, was in this house that I was attracted to this particular house. I didn't know why. I just had to have that house. So we took that one and we chose that one out of all the others we looked at to build it. And then something I'm like, I need more deer things in here. It doesn't quite look like the display home that I loved so much. And now it's slowly evolving. There's deer stuff everywhere. And it's like, oh, wait, it wasn't the house at all. It was everything else that was in it.
That's it. It's that hindsight when you can look back and go, hang on, they really were trying to tell me for a long time.
And it's like he was tapping at the door saying, hello, I'm here. Didn't notice him until now. But anyway, so yeah, you go.
I was going to say you could go. I was going to. You do it.
You.
Okay. So continuing on with that then, I'd love to now talk about the good folk, fairies, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because apparently I really need to know about this today as well, as we've seen this morning. So I guess one of the things is, what are some of the myths and things that people kind of perceive them as being and what they truly are?
Sure.
I guess I know that's probably a really huge
So on Witchin and Bitchin, debunking the fairies.
Yes. But yeah, what that difference is, because I know a lot of people often think of like the Tinkerbells, there's a lot of that side of things. And then there's even sort of through stories and things like that of that they're all lovey and wonderful and lots of little
But then
things.
you hear the opposite too about that they will hide your keys and like the mischievous stuff that they do. And then there's like, I mean, I don't know a lot about it, but maybe we'll dabble into this in the question or the answer, sorry, it, like, you know, I hear stories of like in Ireland that you can't go to certain places because it's the fairies live there and you're not allowed to set foot on there, or they're like, there's hand fastings that you do where you put your hands through a fairy circle and do the hand fasting. I don't know. Like, let's explore that, because I'm sure that you're probably, I don't know. I feel like you know the answers.
Sure. Well, what we really have today is this kind of two different and sort of opposing understandings of fairies, and one of them comes from the folklore, which is the basically cultural beliefs that get passed down through generations. And I will start by saying we use the term fairy, which is obviously an English word, and you know, people primarily sort of think of like Western European, like the UK and the Celtic countries with fairies, but we see fairy-like beings that would fit the sort of general definition of a fairy all around the world. All cultures kind of have some sort of concept of a being that is in the human world but isn't from the human world. Kind of has another world that it lives in, but it can enter into ours, and who has the ability to like enchant or magically influence humans, who can be dangerous, who can cause illnesses or madness or death, you know, super fun at parties. Sorry. Or, you know, can do positive things as well, like healing and luck and money. You know, it's whatever they can cause in a negative sense, they can also bring the positive to that same thing. But that's something we find everywhere. And when you see populations shifting around and moving, you know, like people in Scotland and Ireland going to Canada and the US and Australia, they seem like they bring these beings with them, that these beings follow populations and then kind of spread. And I'm mostly saying this just to point out that this, you know, when we talk about what fairies are, you know, we want to be careful not to kind of get it in our head like it's just this one specific kind of very niche cultural concept. Like they're kind of all over the place under different names usually, but we can find them kind of everywhere. And I did just sort of touch on some of the things they can do. It is a catch-all term, fairy. So, you know, when we see the older folklore with fairies, you know, you have some that are a few inches tall, you have some that are 18 inches tall, 3 feet tall, 5 or 6 feet tall, some that look very much just like humans, no wings, no pointed ears. You see some that look like horses or dogs or cats. I mean, it's a really wide range. Selkies would look like a seal in the water, but then out of the water, they can take the seal skin off and look like a human. And these are all fairies. These are all types of fairies. And so it's a hugely broad category. And, you know, some fairies can be helpful to humans, or, you know, can be inclined to be helpful to humans if, you know, if you are polite to them or give them a lot of dairy products, which weirdly enough, dairy products are another global fairy thing. Like whatever culture you look at, if they have dairy and they have some kind of fairy, that they usually, those two things intersect. I was talking with a friend of mine who is a Tibetan Buddhist and is absolutely brilliant person. He translates Sanskrit and Tibetan and all sorts of cool stuff because he's just amazing. But I was talking to him about this, and he was mentioning that the spirits they have in Tibet that are similar to what we call fairies, also very into milk, give them milk offerings. And I was like, it's just really interesting. So milk is always a safe go-to.
I was gonna say that's always the one.
Yes, you can never go wrong with milk or dairy products. But so we have these folkloric fairies that are like this, and they can be dangerous. And, you know, this is where we get this idea, you'll see, like you mentioned in Ireland, of like, you don't cut down certain trees because it'll anger them, and then they will respond in an angry manner. You don't go to certain hills. You know, you don't mess with their stuff, basically, because it won't end well for you. But then we also have these, like, what I call pop culture fairies, popular culture fairies, which is like the Disney Tinkerbell. It's the ones that you'll see in a lot of fiction.
Mhm.
where, you know, they're even if they try to be a little closer to the folklore, they tend to be very romanticized and very anthropomorphized, very human-like. And those are definitely completely separate sort of concepts.
Mhm.
That idea of like fairies as helpful guides and like earth angels, that's sort of a Doreen virtue kind of thing. Fairies. You know, a lot of that comes from the Victorian era and theosophy, and that whole sort of time period. The Victorians were really big on reinterpreting cultural fairies and making them like children's entertainment.
So theosophy, we're talking like Blavatsky and all of that?
Yep.
Okay.
Theosophy took the idea of fairies, and the idea of fairies particularly kind of interpreted through alchemy, and which is the four elemental groups of fairies, and the Victorian idea of, you know, romanticizing nature, and blended it all sort of together so that we get this idea of fairies as nature spirits who, you know, are like associated with particular elements and are more helpful, and all of that kind of comes out of that mix. Which is actually really super fascinating. I could honestly talk for the entire hour just about that. Because it's just super interesting how that all sort of evolved and happened. But once it made it to fiction, like once a thing hits fiction, it becomes really widespread.
And I guess that's another hard thing, is it's like when you're reading certain things, like you never know where someone's drawing the information from, like whether it's from a credible source or whether they're just going pop culture. Like, because these days, like I tried to look for, I wanted to have a depiction of fairies in my book Shadows, and I tried to look for an image of what I would consider to be a real fairy on the internet. Do you know how hard it is to find what I think a fairy looks like? I'm like, why is everything like Tinkerbell? Like, it's so irritating. And like, that's not how they look to me from what I've seen of them. But then but as you described, I've seen some fairies which are like big, ginormous, like 6-7 foot, almost Yeti looking things. But then I've also seen tiny little things that you would, I don't know, for lack of a better phrase, like imps, goblins, that kind of looking thing. Like, and I've seen something that are like kind of in between that. And then I have seen them that look like human. And when I tried to sit here and reconcile it, and I was asking spirit source, my guides, like, why do they keep looking like different things? And they said, well, that's because they are all different. Like, there's not just one thing. And then what I've come to learn is that like spirit will always show you itself in whatever makes sense to you, or whatever's gonna like your point of reference almost. So if you've only been subjected to Tinkerbell looking fairies, then maybe it will show itself to you like that first, to kind of ease you into their world, so it's not so like, oh, what are you? I don't know, any takes on that?
Actually that brings up an excellent point, because I had mentioned, you know, fairies and folklore don't have wings, which is true. They fly, but they fly with magic. They don't have wings. But the idea of them having wings started in the theater in, you know, 16th, 17th century, because they needed a way to make it clear if an actor was playing a fairy. How are you supposed to know?
Define it.
You know, they can't walk out with a sign that says I'm a fairy.
It's not quite, doesn't quite have the same zing to it when you're watching it.
Ruin the immersion a little bit.
That's it.
So they started putting the actors in little wings, because it was this idea that, you know, fairies through a lot of different Christian lenses are seen as being not demons and not angels, but kind of in between. So they can't have bird wings because that's angels. They can't have bat wings because that's demons. So they would give them like insect wings, butterflies and that, which also looks really nice, you know, on stage. And then it made its way into artwork. And then we started seeing it in fiction. But still, through all of this, people actually having like anecdotal experience, people having, you know, seeing them, encountering them, would never describe them having wings until about 1970, 1980 is when we first start to see people. And that was when, if you think about it, it would be so hard in like mainstream, particularly US culture, to see a fairy that didn't have a wing. because that's all the artwork has them with wings. Even in books, they would kind of be described that Tinkerbell, winged pixie sort of thing.
Thank you, Disney.
Yeah, thank you for so many things. Thank you, Disney, but that one in particular, yes. And it's this idea that, like you were saying, it permeates the culture so much that becomes what people expect. And if that's what you're expecting to see, you're dealing with these beings who are shapeshifters, and you have a magic, it's called glamour, that can influence human perception. So you're going to see that, and that's, how they're basically saying, well, I'm a fairy, and I'm a fairy because I have wings.
Because I'm doing the thing.
Because that's what you're expecting. So it's really interesting. And I do think you're right that they will present themselves to us in ways to get their message across, whatever that message is. If they're trying to scare you, then they're going to look, unpleasant. And if they're trying to, let you know that they're a fairy, they'll have wings. They'll look stereotypically, pop culture fairy-ish. And, sort of your perception and your expectation definitely is going to affect that 100%.
So do you know then from your research where the pointed ear thing came from? Because that's another thing that is very common. Like people always think fairies have to have pointed ears, and because you can't see them on camera, but I've got a couple of goblets up on the top shelf on this side, and it's a couple of I'd call them like elves or like the Fae, and they've got the pointed ears with the crown of roses and whatnot, and like their little goblets, and I love them. But see, one of my guides presents herself with the pointed ears and everything. Yeah. But that's how she looks to me. I don't know if other people would perceive her the same. Because I think that that's part of my pop culture references, that I'm into that world from a fantasy fiction reader and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, and that's, again, it's that same thing where it's become so popular, particularly after the Lord of the Rings movies came out. It was a little bit before then too, but after those movies came out, I don't think you could find an elf or a fairy that didn't have pointed ears anywhere. It's super interesting if you look at the way the pointed ears happened, because it initially, you would occasionally see them in artwork, but not a lot. And the oldest examples were based on basically the Greek satyr. And it was actually a mistranslation of something in the Bible that compared a certain type of demon to satyrs, and this idea that they had these almost like donkey-like pointed ears, very large, oversized, and pointed. And this then got into artwork a bit, where particularly again the Victorian era, you would see them trying to differentiate. Fairies had wings but round ears, but elves would have pointed ears and no wings. And it's this visual cue. So when you saw it, you'd be like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. And then Tolkien, when he was writing, he actually doesn't say in any of his published works that elves have pointed ears, but he had made a note in some of his appendices somewhere, comparing them to leaves, that sort of pointed leaf shape. So it kind of went from there. And then of course, the more it gets depicted in pop culture stuff, you had the cartoon Lord of the Rings movies, if you can remember those. That was before my time, in fairness, but I have seen them because they were kind of everywhere when I was younger. But elves with pointed ears again, so you could tell what's an elf versus what's a human in the movie. And then it's super interesting to me to watch this evolution, because now in anime and gaming, World of Warcraft in particular, they make the ears like these hugely ridiculous, oversized, completely non-functional. You would get those chopped off in a battle in 2 seconds. Not to mention, there's all sorts of other reasons just biologically that
can't be good.
It would not make a lot of sense, but I will not get off on a whole rant about the unreality of World of Warcraft elf ears. But that actually is closer to what the much older depictions of like the satyrs, I cannot say that word tonight, satyrs, with the almost like donkey, the really big animalistic.
Yeah.
Which is funny because the whole point of those ears was to compare them to animals, to say that, you know, you're half goat and you have giant oversized donkey ears. And now we're kind of going right back to that with fairies, because you're starting to see that in artwork in a lot of places now. Yeah, that's like the way people are picturing elf ears is big and pointed, and I'm reading stories now that describe them that way. So it's just fascinating to see how this idea will take root and then spread. And like you said, now people having actual experiences will mention seeing them that way. I think because we're so primed to expect it.
Yeah.
You know,
it kind of roots itself in that collective consciousness kind of thing. And that it takes on a life of its own. Yeah, exactly. It becomes like, again, you know, giving you what you expect. You if you see it with pointed ears, you immediately kind of have associations for what would that be.
Yeah. So I guess then if people are kind of wanting to go back to and find the original sources and really get into the fairy realm in the way it's, I guess, authentic. I don't know how else to say that. Like obviously you've written a ton of books, but where else can they, like, aside from your books, like where else are some like reputable sources or places that people can go that they're not going to get this romanticized, like Tinkerbell version of fairies? Sure. I don't know why, but a lot of people really do prefer fiction as a source. I have opinions on, but I will not share them because that would be a whole rant. If you really want to go to fiction as a source, Susanna Clarke's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is excellent. And they actually made a BBC series.
I was going to say, I think that's a TV series as well, isn't it? Yeah.
You can watch the TV series, very realistically depicted folklore in that. There's a book called The Knowing by Kevin Manwaring, which is also very good. Or The Call by Peter O'Gullen, very close to actual folklore, if you want to go to fiction. If you don't want to go to fiction, which is actually, I would recommend not going to fiction, right? If you have to, those are your best options. But Eddie Lenihan in Ireland is a very well-known storyteller. He talks a lot about the other crowd. He has a book called Meeting the Other Crowd, which is all Irish fairy stories, basically. There's a gentleman by the name of Michael Fortune who has a YouTube channel, and he actually goes around and interviews people, sometimes younger people, but particularly older people, about the folklore that they know and the stories that they know. And some of it is them repeating older folklore stories, but some of it is like, you know, I remember, you know, I don't remember, but an interview with someone and they would say like, oh, I remember when I was younger and my neighbor, you know, accidentally cut a fairy tree and this is what happened. And so it's really, you know, really good stuff to look to. There's a website called Duchas.ie, DUCHAS.ie, and it's a collection of folklore that was written down in the early 20th century by school children. And again, you can search, you know, banshee, puka, fairy in general, and you'll get all these great original folklore stories. I'm obviously primarily focused on the Irish, so that's why I'm giving you all these Irish references. Terry Gunnell in Iceland is very good for the Alfar, the Norse. Mara Starling has a book coming out on Welsh witchcraft, and she has a whole chapter in there about Welsh fairies, which is amazing. She's an excellent resource. She also has TikTok where she does occasionally some Welsh folklore videos, which are great. Trying to think if I can think of any Scottish resources offhand. Cowan and Henderson have a book called Scottish Fairy Beliefs, which is really good. Brian Walsh has a book called The Secret Commonwealth and the Fairy Belief Complex, which is looking at Reverend Kirk's writing. Reverend Kirk is like the holy godfather of fairy research.
Yeah.
He was a minister who wrote in the 17th century, and he basically wrote a treatise on Scottish fairy beliefs at the time. And it's wonderful, wonderful material. It's written in Scots, which is not always easy to read. So I recommend Brian Walsh's book because he includes an modern English translation.
Yeah.
But yeah, any of those are great resources. Laura O'Brien has a YouTube channel, and she also has some paid classes about fairies. She's in Ireland. That would be another great source. I could keep going.
This
a lot more sources.
This is good though, because and this is the type of conversation that I'm glad we're having, because it's like often when we talk about something, we forget to think of or to ask where they can go for more information.
Yeah.
Because it's always good to kind of follow the breadcrumbs and to get to the real stuff. So one thing we did touch on then was obviously we've mentioned a little bit about Irish, and then Scottish, Welsh, English, and then Norse. So just for the lay person, the differences between Celtic and Irish, and the differences between then Irish and Norse, how would one differentiate or know, how do you differentiate, or if to categorize them correctly and stuff?
Sure. Celtic is sort of a catch-all term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of those flying around tonight. This morning for you, tonight for me.
Yeah.
We talk about Celtic. Celtic is really, it's a group of cultures that are connected by language primarily, and then some shared mythology and artwork. So the 6 modern Celtic nations are Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, the Isle of Man, and Brittany, which is in northern France. Historically, there were many more than that. Gaul, which we're talking about Carnados earlier, being Gaulish is one. Gaul would have been a little south of where Brittany is now. Gaul was gigantic. I shouldn't make it sound like it was this tiny little area of France.
What became the Frankish Empire or whatnot?
Yeah. It was much bigger than my offhand comment just implied. And there used to be more than that even that were, that didn't survive into, really recorded history. So we don't have a lot of evidence of them. Gaul, we have a lot of Gaulish material. So when we talk about Celtic, we're kind of talking about that umbrella term with pagan. It covers a lot of specific things in it. When we talk about Irish, that would be one of those specific Celtic language cultures. It's most closely related Irish to Scottish and Welsh. And then, you have degrees of separation with the others. And, when you get into the Norse, it gets interesting. I'm kind of thinking about interrelated cultures here, because Norse had a lot of influence because they had that habit of, raiding and settling and taking places over. Pesky little habit they had at the time. So there's parts of Scotland, particularly lowland Scotland, that have a lot of Norse influence. I mentioned Reverend Kirk's book is written in Scots. Scots is an absolutely fascinating language that is sort of the unholy love child of Norse, Middle English, and Gaelic, which is Scottish Gaelic. So if you can picture those 3 languages having a baby, that would be Scots.
That would be so interesting.
That would be Scots. It is.
Yeah.
It's a really fascinating and beautiful language. Some people argue it's a dialect and not a language, but I think it's a language because if you don't understand some of the words they have, you're not going to understand it. It's not like just an accent. It's more complicated than that. But you see a lot of Norse influence there. The Orkney Isles, a lot of Norse there, Norse culture there. Norse culture actually kind of took over and it became completely Norse there. But then on the flip side, you have some place like Iceland, who obviously primarily settled by the Norse, tons of Norse culture. But again, getting into this pesky habit that certain Norse cultures had about 1,000 years ago, they tended to get their wives involuntarily from Ireland. So you had all these Irish women who ended up settling in Iceland, again, involuntarily, but they ended up there, and they had all their beliefs that they brought with them. So when we look at Icelandic fairy beliefs, beliefs connected to the Alfar and the Huldufolk, it's really, really similar to the Irish.
Yeah.
And for a long time, scholars were a little confused about why that was. And then it was like, well, because like a quarter of people in Iceland have Irish DNA for a reason.
Yeah, that's it. They've brought it with them. And especially being the women as well, as that often then they were the ones that would pass that on a little bit as well.
Yeah, because and those are the the women being the ones who had the children from when they were very young until they were old enough to go train with the fathers or apprentice or whatever. They would be the ones passing on the whole, like, you give milk to the good folk and you don't mess with them. And so you see a lot of things in Iceland that are even today that are very similar, like roads getting rerouted because it interferes with an elf place. Elfakirkjan is what they're called, elf churches in Iceland. But it's the same concept you see in Ireland with roads getting rerouted because there's a fairy tree, or there's a fairy fort that you don't want to mess with.
Don't mess with that.
Yeah.
You just remind me of some of these memes that I've seen on the internet where it's like, it shows, I think it was like a swing we're surrounded by like stones, and it's like, I'm not going on that swing because it's literally everyone thinks it's like a fairy ring going around it.
There was one going on recently that was a circle of mushrooms around a place that the slide went like right into the circle of
maybe
mushrooms.
That's what it was. Sorry. I think so. It might have been. It's like I don't know if I'd be game.
No.
Yeah, I don't think so.
No, I wouldn't push my luck.
Not the way this decade's going.
No.
No. Maybe wait till all of the current world stuff is over. And I'm going to say that because I don't want to give any more heat to it. But like when all the current stuff in the current era is over, maybe then we can definitely.
I see a lot of memes that go around and like Tumblr quotes and stuff that go around that are like, oh, I wish the Fae would come steal me. And I'm like, you really need to read some more folklore because that is not going to work out the way you think it is.
Well, it's like, I don't know if you've seen Outlander. There's a particular, like the series on, I think it's on HBO, but I
actually haven't.
Oh, okay. So I'm
this is my bad Celtic pagan moment. I have not watched Outlander.
That's okay. That's okay. So in Outlander, there's obviously a lot of scenes because it's mainly in Scotland. And they talk about like particular fairy mounds and fairy rings and stuff like that. And there's at one point where someone was, their baby was sick and they put it as an offering to the fairies for it to become a changeling or something. They had to, I don't know, some kind of agreement with the fairies that you had to leave the baby there. And
they might have thought it was a changeling and they were trying to get them to take it back and return the human baby.
Okay, that's what it was then.
Yeah. Because that's something we see a lot in I shouldn't say a lot, but we see that across folklore. The idea that it wasn't just babies in the folklore, it was like all ages. Anyone was open season. Yeah. Actually,
I didn't realize that. I'd only ever heard of babies. Yep.
Yeah. Most people tend to talk about the babies the most, but the most famous example of a changeling in Ireland, it's a very sad, tragic story, but in the 1890s was a woman named Bridget Cleary, and she was 26. So definitely adults are also,
in there too.
Also an option. Yeah.
So I guess then what if someone accidentally, I know we've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but we love a good tangent on this show.
Okay.
If someone accidentally stumbles across a fairy tree or a fairy mound or a fairy ring or any of the above, is there any telltale signs of how you can A, tell that you've been there, or B, if you have and you didn't mean it, is there a way you can appease the fairies so they don't get vengeance?
Protocols.
I mean, I think usually if you end up there unintentionally, like you will usually know, like things will get weird. The atmosphere changes. There's actually stories of people who did not believe and were very like, fairy nonsense, whatever. But then they have that moment where they go somewhere they shouldn't, or they, get into something they shouldn't. And I mean, these are people who are very skeptical and don't believe in this sort of thing, but once they kind of get there and that atmosphere starts to shift, and for example, I do believe, but I've had experiences where you get somewhere that they don't want you to be, and like everything goes completely silent. The insects stop, the birds stop. One
that's
time,
giving me chills.
I know.
well, I'm just saying, like, you just have to be aware, like when stuff like that happens, like back away slowly. You're like, I'm sorry. And yeah, they value politeness. So just apologizing and being like, I'm sorry, no offense intended. Again, dairy. When I was in Ireland, it was a running joke with the people. I shouldn't say when, because I've been there more than once. When I am in Ireland, it's a running joke usually with whoever I'm with that I will have butter in my purse. Like anytime we go to restaurants, I will like nick the pats of butter at the restaurants. Yep. And I'll have them in my purse. So like when things happen, I'm just like, let me get the butter.
Let me get it out.
Yep.
I'm storing that in my back
I know,
pocket.
I'm like, great idea.
When I eventually get to Ireland, I'm taking those little sachets of butter and I'm just going to keep onto them just in case.
Yep. The little foil wrappers make it convenient. You just,
Yeah.
It's a perfect little portion.
Hopefully it's not too hot a day when you've got them all in your bag, because that could be messy.
I had actually put them all in a larger Ziploc bag, larger plastic bag.
A little Ziploc bag in there, and you'll be fine.
Yep. Yeah.
I love it. This is practical tips 101. Like if you go to Ireland or anywhere where there's fairies, carry some butter, Ziploc bag, done.
Yeah. You never know when you might need it.
That's it.
It comes in handy.
And so, okay, let's play devil's advocate. Someone's listening to this podcast and they're actively wanting that experience. Any words of wisdom or warning for those people?
I mean, the first thing I usually tell people when they ask me how to like engage with these beings is, a big thing to remember is these are individual beings with agency. They can do or not do whatever they choose. And there are people who will spend their entire lives seeking this experience and never have it.
Mm-hmm.
If they do not want to engage with you, they will not. You can't if you get into the grimoire material, you can compel them, but I don't recommend that because that won't end well for you eventually. Yeah. But, there's no way you can like, in a non-ceremonial magic kind of way, force them to interact with you. And I also just like to remind people that like, whatever you think it is that you are going to get is not necessarily what you're going to get. If you have this idea that it's like a cute, twee little garden fairy, certainly those exist. Pretty much everything, that Shakespeare quote, there's more on heaven and earth, Horatio, than you're imagining. So I'm sure garden fairies are out there somewhere, but there's so much else out there. And if you just sort of open yourself up to anything that might want to come along and have an interest in you, that is often not going to end well. So just kind of, I encourage people to be cautious. It's like throwing open your front door and saying, well, I want my neighbor down the street. I want to meet them and talk to them. So I'm just going to throw my front door open. Well, you don't know who's going to come in. Anyone could come in, wild animals could come in. It's,
I don't know whether to bring attention to this or not. I don't know if y'all have picked up on this, but when we've been talking this whole time, there's always some kind of background noise. As soon as I asked that question, it went dead silent. And I'm like, this is like, I'm like, okay, I'm listening. I won't meddle with things that I don't understand. It's okay.
Yeah. What I usually tell people is if you really want to do this, if I'd mentioned earlier, I consider myself a witch. I specifically consider myself a fairy witch, which is a witch who engages primarily with this. If that's something that you really feel passionate about and you really feel like this is what you're meant to do, what I usually tell people besides those two things is just be very specific in what you're trying to engage with. Start with house fairies, start with things that are already around you and already inclined to kind of like you. Or be willing to like you. Start small and work your way out from there. Because I do get a lot of people contacting me through various social media, with like this, I was interested and I wanted to have an experience, and now I have this horrific problem. What do I do? And it's, it's a whole different culture. It's a whole different etiquette with fairies. And one of the things that gets tricky with them in particular, as opposed to some other kinds of spirits, ghosts, what have you, is once you've kind of put out an invitation or an offering, it's really hard to take that back. I tend to tell people, like, you imagine them like lawyers. They're all very, very good lawyers, and they will like loophole you and fine print and so just start with house fairies, start small and work up from there, but definitely don't just be like whatever wants to show up.
Come on in.
welcome. So then, like, not to go too pop culturally, but like obviously this is a point of reference that some people have, that like to engage with the fairy realm. I mean, you think of the things that are available, right? So people think of those little cutesy little fairy doors with all the little things you can put out for your children to get involved with them. Or some people have that little fairy ring that they create outside in their backyard in the corner of the garden and stuff like that. Like, are these real? Like, is this a real way to engage, or is this more of a fun thing to do to involve children? Like,
so here's my opinion on the trendy stuff. Fairy houses, I'm very pro fairy house. And there's a history of that, actually, depending on how you want to define a fairy house, all the way back into the Roman period. The idea that, especially like house spirits and your garden spirits, you offer them a place, and it's like basically a shrine for them. It's a way to be welcoming and respectful. So that I'm 100% okay with that. Fairy doors, I'm not gonna lie, I hate them. First of all, the Irish Fairy Door Company, bless them and their marketing. If you buy one of those, it actually comes with a written contract. I'm like 90% sure it's run by actual fairies. I should mention. The Irish Fairy Door Company. It actually comes with a lease agreement that you or your child are supposed to sign for the fairy to like live in your house, which to me, like, all sorts of red flags.
I was gonna say, hang on, don't be doing that. Read that fine print.
Like I said, fairy lawyers, like, don't do it. And just the idea of fairy doors, I don't like, because it's a door, but you don't know for sure what's going to come through it. It's not like a filter where it's only going to be, the twee little Tinkerbell fairies. It's you're literally just setting up a door to the other world and inviting in potentially to your child's bedroom. And children and fairies have a very long, complicated history. I mean, in pop culture, fairies are kind of seen as the minion of children, but in wider folklore, fairies are known to steal them a lot. So yeah, I'm not a fan of fairy doors. The little decorative outdoor garden, like fairy rings, I mean, they're cute, they're harmless, they're not gonna hurt anything. It's like little fairy dolls that kids can make. Go ahead, have fun. I'm not 100% against fun. Just no.
No, just know what you're dealing with before you go dabbling in it, kind of thing. Is basically
that's the thing, isn't it? Because like you're opening a portal, kind of thing.
Right.
You're opening that, like you said, that doorway to another realm or to the other side, and it's
right.
Anyone can come in.
It's like if you live somewhere that has poisonous snakes, poisonous spiders, dangerous animals. If you want to set up like an animal feeder in your yard, you have to be very careful what you're putting out and where you're doing it, so that you're only getting cute little songbirds, for example, in my area, and not something that potentially is going to kill you.
Yeah, that's right.
Nobody wants that. Well, I assume nobody wants that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if people kind of think of it that way, I think maybe that'll help a little bit.
I think you really said it very early on in the meeting is that respect and having that general respect. Like, even if, like you said, in folklore and it's in culture and things like that, even if it's not necessarily their belief system, there is still that innate respect that is there for what it is. And I guess that's what we need to continue on with everything, is to have that common sense and that respect.
I would 100% agree.
Yeah.
But so then, if people want more information specifically about the fairy realm, I mean, you've written a ton of books.
Yes.
I could sit here and list them all, but I know there's a lot of them.
Please don't.
No, but which would be the ones that you would recommend from your own writings of where people can start? Like, where's the starting point if people want to get into this specific genre of like to become a fairy witch, or to at least know something about it?
Know more about it.
Yeah, my primary recommendation, I have a book called Fairies, A Guide to the Celtic Fair Folk. And that would be what I recommend people start with. It kind of goes over the etiquette, the safety stuff, sort of what they actually are, as opposed to, the more pop culture ideas. And I think that's a really solid place for people to start. And then there's multiple directions you can go from there. And that one right now it's out in paperback, and it's coming out in audiobook shortly. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
For those that don't like to read, like my husband's like, give me an audiobook any day. And whereas I'm the opposite. I
want the paper.
If I listen to an audiobook, I tune out, my mind goes off elsewhere. I'm like, wait, what was I listening to? And I'm like, wait, I missed a whole chunk. I need the book. Book, you know what I mean? No, that's awesome.
I'm with you.
Yeah, no, because I thought, like, at least then that can start that journey and see where it takes them. I mean, there's still a part of me that's like, oh, do I want to set up a little thing for them to No, I think I need to do a little bit more research before I dabble in that world.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely something that can be done. You just want to, like anything else, you want to approach it safely.
Well, I guess in a general witch sense, it's like,
that's right.
There's a reason why we cast circles when we're doing the work. It's because we're trying to create that barrier or that boundary or that protective kind of zone that whatever we're doing isn't going to get interfered with by otherworldly things. So I guess it's no different to that. Like, we're not just going to open up a portal here. Otherworld things, come on into this house. Like, if you wouldn't do that to anything else,
right. Well, and it's the same thing. Kind of the flip side of it when people talk about spirit boards. Like, they get such a bad reputation, and everyone's like, oh, never use them, burn them, blah. But if you know how to use them safely, if you know how to do it, it's okay. The reason so many people have problems with it is because they don't. And it does become much like with the fairies, just anything that's hanging around, you want to talk to me. Like, oh, that's such a bad idea.
It's just
right. But if you know what you're doing, like any tool, it's not the tool itself that's inherently, good or bad, really, but you have to know how to use it safely in order to not have problems. And it's kind of the same with the good folk. I often also tell people, when you think of the good folk, when you think of fairies, try to treat them the way you would treat other human beings.
Oh, that's a dangerous. No, I'm just kidding. For some people, no, I'm just kidding.
That's fair.
I always like to say, treat like anything in the other world. I always treat them as if I'm meeting a stranger for the first time. Like, you wouldn't just go out and lash out at someone on the street and start yelling and cursing and whatever and treating them with disrespect. You would always be nothing but pleasant, always please and thank you.
Respectful.
Everything has to come first from respect. And once you've earned that respect and you have that relationship, maybe then you could blur the lines a little, but still from a respectful, like, if they know you're joking, it might be okay.
That's it. Once you built that relationship.
No, that's brilliant. And I would agree with all of that. And I mean, you can build friendships, you can build alliances, like it's like anything else. You work with the same, or you connect to the same being for long enough, I would definitely be much more comfortable joking with like my house spirits, my house fairies, than something that I just randomly ran into, out somewhere. You're getting like company manners if I'm out somewhere random and I meet you, but if I'm home and it's my house spirits that I've lived with for like 16, 17 years, then,
different.
You might get a little humor.
Yeah.
Or they might hide your keys occasionally just for fun. just to have their entertainment of watching you ransack the house looking for the keys and then they appear the spot that they were not in. I've had that happen. Like I've had that happen where I'm like, I looked in the place where I knew I put them. They weren't there. I ransacked the whole house. And then eventually my husband goes, they were here. And I'm like, no, they were not. They were not there. That's the first fucking place that I looked. Of course they were not there. Wherever you are, stop it.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's true though. And I've had them take like not my keys, they tend to take my jewelry, but I've had so many weird things. Like when I tell people, I know they don't believe me, but I have witnesses to a lot of this and it's true. I had a bracelet disappear right before I was moving out of a house, and we moved and I didn't see the bracelet for a couple months. Then I walked in and it was in the middle of my bathroom floor. And I'm like, really? Like completely different house, different towns, different house. And I'm like, okay.
All right. There it is.
Yep.
Dare I ask, did you start wearing the bracelet again after that? No, I'm just joking. What if they did something to the bracelet? You put it on and poof, off you go. Where you end up, you don't know.
Am I even really here now?
I don't know about you, but I'd be scared to put it back on if they've had it for that long. Who knows what they did to that bracelet? You put it on, it could be like a portal in itself.
I think I'm so used to it at this point because like I said, they'll take my jewelry and it'll be gone for months, and then it'll show up somewhere that it could not possibly have been that whole time. I had a ring disappear. I had taken it off and put it on a bookshelf because I'm lazy with my jewelry sometimes. But I knew right where it was. And the next morning it wasn't there. So I figured, okay, I do have cats. Maybe it got knocked. And, if the cat was swatting it around, I'll never see it again. Yeah. And it showed up again months later in the ashtray in my car. I don't smoke, so I keep spare coins there, like change.
Yeah.
And I was going to get like some spare change for something. And I'm like, what is this nonsense? Yeah.
That is so bizarre.
I love it.
Yeah.
That is so bizarre. I love it though. Like that's cool. That's kind of fun though. Yeah. I mean, not fun if they hide something that you actually need.
No, that's right.
But fun if it's just something little that you're like, oh, let's play a game of hide and go fetch.
Yes. When will I see this again, and where will it show up?
Yep.
Yep.
No, this has been an absolutely amazing conversation. I'm glad that we've had this conversation, even though I know we've only scratched the tip of the iceberg, and I could honestly sit here and chat about this topic now that we've started to unravel it. There's so many more questions that I have, but I'm conscious of time.
Yes.
And the fact that your children are probably going to want to go to bed soon.
I'm honestly surprised I haven't seen any of them.
No.
I've seen the cats.
I was going to say
the cats come in a few times.
Go, but that's it.
But Morgan, this has been so amazing, and I'd love to bring you back again in the future.
Sure.
For a follow-up episode.
I'd love to come back.
Awesome.
I'd love to come back. Yeah, and thank you for having me. This was really fun.
And so, if people want to follow you on social media, how can they find you? What's the best ways? We'll stick links below, above, wherever you're looking at this.
Wherever it is.
But what's the best ways?
I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I have a Patreon. I'm everywhere. And at some point I decided to be super boring and everything is just under my name. So it's just Morgan Daimler.
That's not
all
boring.
These other,
it's just it's practical.
It is. All these other authors though, like every social media they have is like some different fun cool name, and I'm just like, no, Morgan Daimler. Wherever you go, just put that in. The only thing that's different is I do have a Tumblr. I admit I have a Tumblr. Like, so dated of me now, and that is not under my name. If you can find that, then good for you.
See, that's the treasure hunt.
That is.
And then I want to hear
one secret account.
I want to hear from our listeners. If you happen to find it, let us know. But don't comment it below, because that's the fun. When you know you can't tell others, they have to find it themselves. Just tell us in the comments if you found it.
But I will say that if you find it, you will know it's me. Like it's very me. But it's not under my name. So
Awesome. Well, Morgan, once again, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been an absolute treat. I feel like I've learned a lot, even though now I just have so many more questions.
Yeah, I know.
But that's okay.
That was the other warning I should have given you. This subject is a rabbit hole. And once that's how I got sucked in when I was a teenager. I was like, I'm going to start looking into folklore. And now all these years later, I'm like, I still have so much more to learn and study.
Maybe that's part of their trickery.
Yeah.
They hook you in with that sweet little offering of, you want to know about us? And then they just keep digging those hooks in and pull you deeper and deeper. And then next minute you wake up and you don't know where you are.
It's 100 years later and you're like, what happened?
How did I get here?
or I mean, this analogy would be wasted on you, but you accidentally touched that rock and there you're in 16th century Scotland. Anyway, it's an Outlander reference. Yeah. Anyways, no, in all honesty, it's been amazing, and hopefully we get to see you again soon. So don't forget, guys, follow Morgan on all social media. She does some both factual as well as like meme oriented posts as well. I love the meme ones. They're very cute and fun to follow. But other than that, we hope you enjoyed this episode. And if there's any questions that you want us to ask Morgan next time, stick them in the comments. Let us know. Where would you like us to take this conversation when we do the part dos? Yes. Where can we go? Because literally I could have gone in like,
I was going to say there were so many, but I'm like,
at least 15 different directions. Yes. But on that note, thank you so much again. And we'll speak to you all very soon.